The champagne glass trembled lightly between my fingers, scattering fractured gold across the borrowed fabric of my deep blue dress. The charity gala whispered around me with conversations I had never been invited to hear, with scents of perfumes I could not afford, and people who looked through me rather than at me. The grand ballroom of the Whitmore Grand Hotel in downtown Savannah glimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen hail over marble polished to a mirror's sheen. I did not belong here. I was here only because Mrs. Esther Whitmore, the elderly neighbor I had cared for ever since my parents passed, had caught a chill and insisted on pressing her invitation into my hand. She told me I needed one night away from that shabby diner job, then slipped her vintage earrings into my palm as a blessing. The dress on my body was hers as well, a satin piece from the 1970s that I had altered by hand with borrowed thread and a needle just sharp enough to make it fit. The fabric brushed my skin like borrowed confidence, soft yet unfamiliar. I exhaled slowly, trying to look less out of place among women in tailored gowns and men in gleaming tuxedos. A server wearing white gloves approached in silence and lifted a silver tray toward me. "Would you like another glass, miss?" I shook my head gently. "Thank you, but no." My voice was so small even I barely heard it. My plan was to stand here for a few minutes, just long enough to represent Mrs. Esther, then slip away to the third floor walk-up apartment in the aging building I called home. Tomorrow I would return to Rosie's diner, tie on the grease-stained apron, refill coffee for truckers and impatient middle-aged businessmen. But the moment I stepped away from the table and moved toward the champagne tower, I felt it, that gaze. A cold thrill swept down my spine, the kind that told me someone was not just looking at me but looking into me, not with the judgment I had grown used to, but with something sharper and quieter. I turned slowly. He stood on the far side of the room, half hidden behind a tall vase overflowing with white orchids. Broad-shouldered, impossibly tall in a dark suit so well cut that even I, someone who knew nothing about fashion, recognized its impossible price. His dark brown hair was brushed back, revealing a face with angles so precise they seemed sculpted from stone. But it was his eyes that stole my breath. Even from across the ballroom, they burned deep, shadowed, filled with something I could not name. Behind him stood two other men dressed just as impeccably, their eyes sweeping the room with deliberate caution. Bodyguards. The realization should have unsettled me, but I could not look away. He lifted his glass slightly, a tiny motion that was almost nothing, yet unmistakably meant for me. Heat flooded my cheeks as I turned back around. I should not be here. I was an outsider dressed in borrowed clothes and borrowed purpose, yet somehow I had become the person the most dangerous man in the room had chosen to notice. A low voice rose behind me, carrying a faint foreign lilt softened by a southern drawl. "You seem uncomfortable." I knew it was him before I turned. Up close, he was overwhelming. His scent, sandalwood and cedar, rich and deep, brushed past me like a forest at dusk. I forced a thin smile. I am not used to events like this. He tilted his head, the curve of his mouth somewhere between amusement and something far darker. Neither am I. He extended his hand. "Graham Callahan." I hesitated before placing my hand in his. "Charlotte Monroe." His hand was large and steady, warm without squeezing, the tips of his fingers brushing my knuckles like the beginning of a promise. "Charlotte Monroe," he repeated, his gaze fixed on my face. "Your name is not on the guest list." My heartbeat stumbled. "I am here for Mrs. Esther Whitmore. She is unwell." "The Whitmore widow," he murmured with a knowing nod. "A neighbor." I nodded, painfully aware of the worn soles of my borrowed heels and the gulf between our worlds. "I think you should stay," he said, his voice quiet and solid as velvet wrapped around iron. It did not feel like a suggestion. The night is long, and events like this are dreadfully dull without someone interesting nearby. I opened my mouth to respond, but the room shifted before I could speak. A group of men entered, their laughter slicing through the elegance like knives. The air tightened. A storm had not broken yet, but it was close. Something in Graham's expression cooled instantly. One of his guards whispered in his ear, and he nodded. "Who are they?" I asked softly. He glanced toward the group, his voice turning crisp as winter air. "Business rivals." Then he looked at me again, his gaze softening without losing its edge. "I am sorry, Charlotte. I have to take care of something." He turned, his bodyguards falling into step behind him. I should have taken the chance to leave. Instead, I found myself drifting after him as if caught in the pull of a distant, dangerous planet. If you felt your heartbeat match Charlotte's as it echoed across that dance floor beside Graham, please subscribe to our channel, hit like, and share the video so we can bring you more stories filled with allure and emotion every day. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Leave a comment below so I know where this story has found you in this vast world. I stood frozen as Graham moved away, his tall figure slipping into the crowd like a strand of shadow threading itself through bright light. The two guards trailed him silently. None of them looked back at me, yet I felt watched, as though his eyes still pressed against my skin, sharp and cold as a blade dragging lightly through silk. I lifted the champagne glass to my lips and tasted only a cool sip that did nothing to steady the quickening of my pulse. Across the ballroom, the newly arrived men were spreading through the space like predators claiming fresh ground. One of them, with blonde hair slicked back and eyes like polished metal, scanned the room with a mixture of arrogance and disdain. His gaze landed on me, and he smiled not warmly, but like a riddle or a dare, as if he knew I did not belong and wondered how I had found my way in. I turned away quickly, but the imprint of that stare lingered like ink that would not fade. The atmosphere shifted again, subtle yet unmistakable. Conversations slowed, laughter thinned. Something about the presence of those men made the room fold inward. Older guests retreated to corners, while younger ones pretended to check their phones. I remembered the way Mrs. Whitmore's eyes used to darken whenever she spoke of the old families of Savannah, a look that mixed caution with years of surviving storms. Graham paused by the buffet, shook hands with an older man in a deep blue suit, and spoke in a voice low enough that the other man leaned in to hear. I watched him, wondering why someone like him had chosen to notice me. It had not been chance. I knew that from the first moment. He had approached me as though the decision had already been made, as though I were a target he had already marked. But for what? I was a diner waitress with no name, no family, no fortune. There was nothing about me that should have mattered to him, unless I was something he needed, or someone he intended to control. My fingers tightened around the borrowed clutch, my palm damp with nerves. A hotel staff member passed by and switched out the appetizer tray with another. I swallowed, stepping toward the tall window overlooking the river. Outside, the water shimmered with fractured reflections of city lights, like 1,000 broken mirrors drifting in the dark. I inhaled deeply, trying to separate myself from the sense of being surrounded by a world I did not recognize. But just as I was preparing to leave, a voice rose behind me, low and deep, like a wave striking stone. "Do not go." I turned. Graham stood there, returned without my noticing. His eyes no longer carried that earlier cold edge. They had softened, almost warm. I nodded before I even realized I was doing it, as if I had slipped into a current stronger than thought. He reached out, his long fingers catching the gold glow of the chandelier against the crisp white of his cuff. "Dance with me." The words were not a command, yet they allowed no refusal. He did not wait for an answer before guiding me onto the dance floor, where couples swayed to the quiet murmur of an old jazz tune. His hand settled at my waist, the other enclosing mine, creating a frame that both sheltered and confined. I tried to breathe normally as each step drew us closer. He led with practiced ease, every movement certain. "Do you dance often?" he murmured. "No," I admitted. "I do not think I know how." "Then let me teach you," he said, his eyes not merely meeting mine but seeming to slip beneath whatever I tried to hide. In that moment, the music, the crowd, the entire dazzling ballroom faded, leaving only the slow drift of our bodies moving together in a dance I did not belong to and could not walk away from. Every movement he made felt like an answer to questions I had not yet formed, and as Graham guided me through the slow turn of the music, his eyes never left my face, leaving me with the unsettling sense that he was studying me down to the bone. No one in the room dared step between us, as though an invisible border had been drawn and everyone instinctively understood they were not meant to cross it. I could feel the curious glances, the wary stares, the flickers of envy and confusion, but none of that mattered, because the man holding me did not resemble anyone I had ever known. Graham said nothing throughout the entire piece, keeping me close enough for the warmth of him to reach me, yet far enough that I remained aware I was treading into unfamiliar territory where every step carried the risk of slipping. When the final Notes faded and a scattering of applause rose around us. He stepped back only half a pace, his hand still wrapped around mine. "Would you like some air?" he asked, his voice roughened by restraint. I hesitated, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs, as though I were choosing something that would quietly alter my life. I nodded. He led me down a long corridor, lit by antique sconces, and out onto a wide balcony overlooking the Savannah River. Night wind cooled the heat on my skin, lifting my hair as I braced my hands on the railing and tried to steady myself. But his presence beside me thickened the air like fog. "I have the feeling," he said slowly, "that you are not someone who comes to places like this." "You guessed right," I answered, keeping my eyes on the shivering water below. "I am a diner waitress." "I am only here for Mrs. Esther, I know." His reply made me turn toward him. "You know, I look into the people who attend events I sponsor," he said calmly, as though this were the most reasonable thing in the world. "And when I saw you tonight, I knew you were someone I needed to meet." "Why?" I asked, my voice roughened by wind and the building tension inside me. Graham did not answer immediately. He stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on the railing near mine, his gaze direct and steady. "Because I trust my instincts," he said, "and my instincts tell me you are not only interesting, but dangerous." I let out a short breath of laughter, unable to hide my disbelief. "Dangerous? I cannot even afford to fix a leaking pipe." "Exactly because you are not like the others," he said, his eyes unwavering. "I am used to pretense, to people who move toward me only because they want something. But you do not want anything from me." "It is not that I do not want to," I said, startled by the honesty that slipped out. "It is that I do not think I have the right." A taut silence stretched between us before he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "I am taking you out of here," he said, his voice lower, sharper. "Tonight." I turned fully toward him, my spine tingling with something between fear and recognition. "I am not sure I understand. I want to take you to dinner. A real one. Not in that crowd. I want to know you, not the borrowed version of you wearing an old dress." "Are you ordering or inviting?" I managed to ask. "I do not order women," he replied, though there was nothing negotiable in his eyes. "I am inviting you, but I do not repeat invitations." My pulse thudded hard. Part of me wanted to refuse, to run back to the small, safe apartment that asked nothing of me. But another part, louder and bolder, whispered that I had already stepped too far to turn back. "I need my coat," I said. He smiled for the first time that evening, a smile not quite gentle but undeniably real. "I will wait in the lobby." I walked away feeling his gaze on me, not the way a man looks at a woman, but as though he were reading me layer by fragile layer, secrets and fears alike, and I began to understand that this was not simply an invitation, it was a doorway. Once stepped through, there would be no returning unchanged. Back inside the ballroom, I hurried through the drifting crowd beneath the chandeliers and soft classical melodies, my thoughts as tangled as knotted thread. My heartbeat still thundered from Graham's blunt invitation, and though I tried to keep my face composed, each step reminded me something inside me had already shifted, as if I had glimpsed a new world that could not be unseen. Near the coat room, I caught sight of the blond man I had noticed earlier. He was still with his group, but now all of his attention was fixed squarely on me. There was no curiosity left in his stare, only a cold, appraising sharpness. He did not look at me like a person, but like a piece of merchandise weighed in silence. I turned away quickly, pulse stumbling. After retrieving my coat and heading toward the lobby, I sensed footsteps behind me. "You are not part of this event," a voice murmured near my ear, soft but heavy with control. I turned, and of course, it was the blond man. He kept a polite distance, but his eyes did not hide their scrutiny. "Did you come here with Graham Callahan?" I did not answer, partly because I had no idea what the right answer was, and partly because instinct warned me that anything I said could be used against me. He smiled without warmth. "I am Lucas Brennan. Graham and I used to be partners." I offered a polite nod. "Nice to meet you. You should be careful," he continued, brushing past the gesture. "Graham has a habit. He destroys everything he touches. People, business, women." I tightened my grip on my coat to keep from trembling. "That sounds like his business, not mine." "No, that concerns everyone who stands near him," Lucas said, his gaze darkening. If you are wise, you will leave, tonight, before things go too far. I do not know where the courage came from, but I lifted my chin and met his eyes. I think I can decide for myself whom I should avoid. Lucas smiled again, this time with a hint of amusement, as though I had passed a test I had not known I was taking. Then I wish you luck. He turned away, leaving me alone in the hum of slowly recovering chatter. I hurried toward the lobby where Graham waited, leaning against a marble column as though he had never moved. When he saw me, his eyes softened, though they still held their quiet, measuring scrutiny. "Lucas spoke to you," he said. "Not a question. He told me I should stay away from you." Graham tilted his head slightly, his face unreadable. "He has reasons to hate me." "And do I have reasons to worry?" I asked, though I was not sure I wanted the answer. He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing whether I could withstand the truth. "I will not pretend I live a simple life, but I have never harmed anyone who did not strike first." "And Lucas?" "Lucas is a man who never learned when to stop," he said, as though repeating a line he had spoken many times. I looked into his eyes and sensed the coldness beneath the calm. I knew I was stepping into a world where the lines between right and wrong rarely stayed clear. And what unsettled me even more was realizing I was not sure I wanted to step back into the safe, dull world I had left behind. Graham moved closer and helped me into my coat, the gesture gentle yet still marked with that undeniable control. When his hand brushed my shoulder, warmth seeped through the fabric. "Shall we?" he asked quietly. I nodded. This time, I needed no push. I had made my choice, and from this moment on, nothing would remain simple. The long black car stopped in front of a small restaurant on the edge of the historic district, where warm golden light washed over brick walls and misted windows. Graham stepped out first, then came around to open my door, his hand extended in a gesture so natural yet so unexpectedly tender that my heart faltered. I placed my hand in his, feeling the warmth of his skin despite the chill, settling over the savannah night. There were no curious stares here, no chandeliers or sweeping violins, yet I still felt as though I were stepping onto a stage where he alone was the audience. The restaurant held only a few occupied tables, each bathed in gentle light, while a soft thread of old jazz drifted from a small speaker in the corner. A server greeted us with a respectful nod and led us to a secluded table near a back window overlooking a narrow alley where strings of lights glowed like scattered stars. After we ordered, Graham studied me for a long moment, his gaze peeling back layers I had draped around myself for years. "Has anyone ever asked you directly what you want?" he asked. I froze slightly, my fingers turning the water glass without thinking. "You mean in life? In anything?" "I do not think I have had the time to think about that." "Then begin tonight," he said, his voice low and steady. "Want anything you want, as long as you do not lie to yourself." His words unsettled. Something inside me, something I had kept locked away for far too long. There was something about him that made it impossible to maintain safe distance, not because he was handsome, though that was undeniable, but because he looked at me as though I mattered, not as a temporary waitress dressed up for a borrowed evening. After dinner, when he offered to take me home, I did not refuse. During the drive, we spoke very little, yet the silence did not feel empty. It carried a quiet rhythm, a connection that did not need words. When the car finally stopped in front of my aging apartment building, I turned to him in surprise. I do not recall giving you my address." He tilted his head, not appearing the slightest bit uneasy. "You did not, but I know you live near Mrs. Whitmore, and I have visited her enough to know which place is yours. You looked into me?" I asked, unable to hide the ripple of worry beneath my voice. "I am interested in you," he said simply, as though it were the most natural truth, and I have a habit of not letting my interest be guided by chance. I stared at him, tangled between alarm and an inexplicable sense of being seen in a way I never had before. "Do you follow people like this?" "Only when they matter," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "And you are very special, Charlotte." I had no idea how to respond. No one had ever called me special. No one had ever looked at me the way he did now. I turned away, clutching the strap of my bag. "I should go inside." He nodded. "I will not ask you to stay if you do not want to." "Thank you for dinner," I said, though my mind was spinning with questions and half-formed fears. "And for everything." I turned quickly, climbing the old iron stairs while sensing his gaze following me. Not as a man watching a woman, but as someone reading me, layer by layer, secret by secret. And I began to understand this was not merely an invitation, it was a threshold. Once crossed, I would not return untouched. Inside my apartment, with the door shut behind me, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. My heart thudded violently, not from fear, but from not knowing where I stood in his world, a world where everything felt calculated. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a storm. Just as I drifted toward exhaustion, my phone vibrated softly on the table. A message, no number, no name. Only 4 words. Sleep well, Charlotte Monroe. I held the phone, my eyes fixed on the message glowing in the dark. No sender, no emoji, just 4 quiet words that chilled me. Sleep well, Charlotte Monroe. Part of me wanted to believe it was Graham, yet another part twisted with doubt. How could he send a message without showing a number? And why send it the moment I reached home, at my most vulnerable, suspended between feeling watched and feeling wanted? I set the phone aside, but sleep was no longer possible. I switched on the kitchen light, brewed ginger tea, and sat at the small wooden table with my mind spinning. The more I thought about Graham, the more complicated everything felt. He was the kind of man whose every gesture seemed intentional, whose every look carried an undertow. And then I remembered Lucas's stare, his razor-edged warning. I opened my old laptop and typed Graham's name. Results appeared instantly: business features, photographs of him at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, charity events he sponsored. Nothing unusual. In fact, too pristine. That was what made it unsettling. A man with that much influence should have left shadows, contradictions, rumors. But Graham's record looked polished within an inch of perfection, as though curated by careful hands. I changed the search. Graham Callahan engaged. That was when a name surfaced that made my breath hitch: Natalie Brennan. I clicked on an old article from nearly 4 years earlier. The photo showed Graham and a blonde woman walking into an event, his hand resting lightly on her back just as it had on mine. Natalie smiled with the confidence of someone who knew the world bent gently toward her. The article described an engagement between Graham and the only daughter of the Brennan family, an alliance between 2 powerful Southern dynasties. But what froze me was not the engagement. It was a line beneath another photo. Natalie Brennan, a few weeks before she vanished from public appearances. Vanished. No breakup statement, no explanation, no scandal. She simply disappeared. I leaned back, pulse drumming. Her last photographed appearance was at a gala strikingly similar to the one I had attended. 1 week later, she was gone. No missing person report, no investigation. Only silence. I searched again. Natalie Brennan missing. Only a handful of small blogs mentioned her, mostly as a fashion figure who faded too soon. No one spoke of why. It was as though people had decided to collectively forget her. My hand brushed the cold teacup and I shivered. What happened to Natalie? And why had Graham never mentioned her? I thought of the way he looked at me, the way he called me special, the way he found my address without being told. I thought of Lucas's warning: Graham destroys what he touches. I did not know whether those words were truth or poison, but that night, lying awake, I could not help imagining another woman once held in his gaze, once believing she was chosen until she vanished without a trace. And I began to wonder whether I was stepping into the same story with a different name. Sleep abandoned me entirely after that. Every time I closed my eyes, Natalie's perfect smile hovered behind my lids, framed by unanswered questions. She had once stood where I stood, drawn into Graham's orbit, ushered into his world, and then erased from it as though she had never existed. The next morning, I arrived at Rosie's diner early, poured myself a strong coffee, and tried to settle my nerves. But every attempt crumbled when Graham walked through the door. He wore a light gray coat over a crisp white shirt, and he did not have to speak to command attention. He simply existed. Several customers glanced up from their breakfasts, and I understood completely. He was the kind of man who altered the air in a room. I signaled to a coworker to cover me, then approached him near the back where sunlight spilled through the window. He pulled out a chair for me, still polite, still composed, but this time I kept a deliberate distance. "I think we need to talk," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered, low, measured, unsettlingly calm. "About Natalie?" I did not soften the question. He did not blink, but I saw the faint clench in his jaw. "I assume you searched," he said. "I saw the photos of you together," I answered, keeping my voice steady, "and the fact that she suddenly disappeared. She left of her own choice," he said, his eyes holding mine. "I did not harm her, if that is what you are imagining." "I do not know what I am imagining," I whispered. "I only know I cannot pretend everything is normal when nothing around you feels clear." Graham leaned back, studying me, not my fear, but my strength. "I will not force you to believe me, Charlotte. But I have a proposal." "What proposal?" He waited a heartbeat before answering. 1 week. "I want you to spend the next 7 days with me. No obligations, no promises. Just time for us to understand each other, for you to see my world with your own eyes instead of through rumor." I frowned, a flutter of unease rising beneath my ribs. "And if I refuse?" "I will step away," he said firmly. "I will not call, not appear, not enter your life again." I searched his eyes for deception, but found none, only unwavering resolve. "Why me?" I asked quietly. "In a world full of women who would chase after you." "Because you are not chasing me," he replied, soft as breath but heavy as stone. "And because you look at me as if I am human, not a prize or a symbol." I looked away, my heartbeat stumbling. 1 week. Enough time to change everything, or enough time to learn he was not who I wanted to believe he was. "I have conditions," I said at last. "I will continue my shifts here at least a few hours each day, and I will not be controlled. I will walk away if I ever feel unsafe." He nodded without hesitation. "Agreed. And I want the truth. All of it. Not what you choose to tell me what actually happened to Natalie." He held my gaze a long moment before speaking. "If you stay until the 7th day, I will tell you everything." I do not know what made me nod. Maybe it was the steadiness in his eyes, or the feeling that I was approaching the edge of something much larger than myself. Or perhaps it was because a part of me had already wanted to trust him long before my mind allowed it. Whatever the reason, when I placed my hand in his and heard him promise to send a car in the morning, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: the coming week would change me, in ways that offered no return. The black SUV stopped precisely in front of my apartment at 7 o'clock in the morning, just as Graham had promised. I brought only a small suitcase with my essentials and the warmest coat I owned, and as I stepped outside, a driver in a tailored suit opened the door with a quiet, respectful nod. The drive to the place Graham called home was not long, yet long enough for me to feel I was leaving behind every familiar corner of my life. The city fell away in the rearview mirror, replaced by towering oak trees lining a stone-paved road that led to a large iron gate opening slowly, almost ceremoniously, as though awaiting someone significant. Beyond it was another world entirely. A long white estate with a dark roof and towering windows rose into view, its facade partially hidden behind meticulously trimmed gardens, with a fountain murmuring softly at the center of the courtyard. When I stepped out of the car, my hand tightened around the suitcase handle as though to steady myself. Graham was waiting at the top of the steps, his hands tucked casually in the pockets of his gray slacks, his eyes never leaving me. Dressed in a crisp white shirt, gray trousers, and immaculate black leather shoes, he extended his hand without a word, and I placed my hand into his, letting myself be guided inside. The interior was unlike anywhere I had ever been. Every wall, every frame, every piece of furniture seemed chosen, with a precision that was both elegant and faintly unsettling. Not showy but refined to the point of intention, as if everything served a purpose I did not yet understand. The living room stretched beneath a high ceiling flooded with natural light, the silence so complete I heard my own footsteps echo across the dark wood floor. A silver-haired woman appeared from the left hallway, her hair neatly pinned, dressed in a pale cream uniform. "This is Mrs. Wilkins," Graham said. "Housekeeper. She will help you with anything you need during your stay." She offered me a polite, distant smile, and I nodded back, trying to suppress my awkwardness. Graham led me upstairs along a hallway lined with enormous abstract paintings that loomed like quiet storms. My room was at the very end, behind a white door that opened into yet another world. A large bed draped in crisp white linens, a balcony overlooking a garden where hundreds of roses bloomed, a fresh vase of flowers on a table beside a leather-bound notebook, and an envelope with my name written neatly on it. I glanced at Graham, but he said nothing, only waited for me to step inside. When I turned back to look at him, there was something in his eyes that felt simultaneously protective and cautionary. "I can leave any time," I reminded him, needing the boundary spoken aloud. He nodded. "You are a guest, Charlotte, and someone I trust." Then he walked away, leaving me alone. I opened the envelope. Inside was a keycard and a small note, the Wi-Fi password, the code to the safe, and one final line: "Dinner at 7 o'clock, in the East dining room." I sat on the coda bed, taking in the immaculate room. Everything was perfect, quiet, beautiful, and foreign. I had never stayed anywhere so lovely, yet I had also never felt so unmistakably watched. Not by eyes, but by presence, by the sense that I had entered a place governed by rules unspoken, where every small sound seemed charged with meaning. As I unpacked my suitcase, placing a few personal items in drawers, hanging my coat in the wardrobe, my breath caught when I lifted a towel near the sink and saw a tiny camera tucked high in the corner of the ceiling, nearly invisible unless the light struck its lens just right. My stomach dropped. This was not a home, this was a domain, and I had just been brought into the center of a game already in motion. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed, my gaze fixed on that small camera. It was nearly invisible, yet now that I had seen it, I could not unsee it. The awareness of being observed slid under my skin, not loud but persistent, as though my every movement required caution. I could not guess how many more cameras were hidden throughout this sprawling estate, perhaps in the bathroom, the hallways, even outside in the garden. Graham had not attempted to hide that he knew everything about me, my address, my schedule, the few relationships I had. As I went downstairs for the 7 o'clock dinner, the East dining room glowed beneath chandeliers. A long table draped in white linen, with tall candles flickering gently, and a faint symphony drifting from hidden speakers. Graham was already seated at the head of the table, dressed in a dark suit without a tie, the open collar revealing the sun-warmed skin along his collarbone. He rose as I entered, pulling out a chair for me as if we were old companions rather than a guarded hostess and a woman who had arrived less than a day earlier into his private world. We ate the soup course in silence. Graham's movements were slow, deliberate, his eyes flicking to me now and then, as though observing behavior of a new creature in an unfamiliar habitat. When the main course arrived, he finally spoke. "Are you comfortable?" I took a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I saw the camera in my room. He did not flinch, and the text message, I continued, finally meeting his gaze. "After the gala. Sleep well, Charlotte Monroe." It came from no number. "That was you, wasn't it?" He didn't deny it, nor did he look surprised. He simply inclined his head, a silent confirmation. "It is difficult to call this comfortable," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I am not used to surveillance." "I understand," he replied, his tone unchanged. "But it is not meant to control. It is meant to protect." "Protect whom?" I asked. "You or me?" He set his utensils down, leaning back, his gaze holding mine. "Both. I have enemies, Charlotte. You saw that at the gala. Some people would harm anyone close to me, not because they care about me, but because they want me off balance. And I am." "The weakness?" I asked. He paused, then nodded. "If I care about someone, that person becomes a target." His honesty unsettled me more than a lie would have. Graham did not try to soothe me. He did not pretend I was safe. He merely told the truth as it was. "I am not someone who lives in your world," I said quietly. "I am not used to cameras, or guards behind doors, or questioning every motive of every person I meet." "But you stayed," he said, his tone gentle but absolute. I drew in a deep breath. "I do not know why I am still here. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the part of me that wants to believe you are not what people say." "I am not," he replied slowly, "but that does not mean I am harmless." Silence stretched between us again, thin and taut as wire. After dinner, he led me down a narrow hallway to a smaller room with wood-paneled walls, low ceilings, and a single antique piano. Shelves of books lined one side, and a glass case displayed old pocket watches, gleaming faintly in the light of the fireplace. Graham sat in a leather chair near the fire and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. I accepted mine, the scent of smoke and oak softening the room's harsh edges. "I once loved Natalie," he said suddenly, without warning. but that love was built on things that did not belong to either of us. My chest tightened for reasons I could not name. Did she leave or was she pushed out? He did not answer right away. Both. I think she realized my world has no room for freedom, and she would not accept that. I took a small sip, the burn warming my throat. And me? Do you think I will accept it? I do not know, he said honestly. But I do not want to lie to you to make you stay. I want you to see everything and choose for yourself. I sat there in the quiet glow of the fire, holding a glass of whiskey, gazing at a powerful man who looked at me as though I were the one thing he could not control. And in that moment, I understood something with a clarity that cut like glass. In this world, love and awe, power were intertwined like the two sharpened edges of a blade, and once touched, there would be no turning back. I began noticing Graham's habits the next morning, not out of curiosity but from an instinctive need to understand how he operated if I hoped to survive in the world he lived in. I woke earlier than usual, moving softly down the carpeted hallway, memorizing every hidden angle, every small camera tucked discreetly behind a vase or within the frame of a wall sconce. Everything inside that estate was arranged with almost surgical precision, as though every possible form of resistance had been calculated in advance. Graham left the house each morning at 8 o'clock, exactly on time, neither a minute early nor late, always in a dark suit with 2 bodyguards shadowing him step for step. He never greeted me unless I happened to be visible. When our paths crossed before he left, his eyes held warmth but also a distance, as if crossing that gate each morning sent him into a role I was never meant to witness. I attempted to ask Mrs. Wilkins a few questions about his daily schedule, but she responded with polished, neutral phrases, the sort of answers scrubbed clean before ever reaching my ears. That was when I realized I was standing in a chess game where every piece was already in Graham's hand, and if I wanted to keep myself intact, I needed a strategy of my own. I began collecting small fragments. He ate dinner at 7 o'clock sharp, preferred a particular whiskey, held his glass with his left hand but wrote with his right. And each night before bed, he spent 30 minutes in his private library before disappearing through a door I had never once seen him open in my presence. One night, well past midnight, I wandered near that section of the house, but within seconds, a man in black appeared in the hallway, as though stepping out of thin air, offering a polite smile as he asked if I needed anything. I smiled back and said no, then retreated to my room with my heart pounding. Whatever lay beyond that door, it was part of Graham he refused to reveal. Some nights he did not come home at all. No explanations, no messages. On those nights, I never slept. I sat staring at my phone, and even the slightest sound made my pulse leap. Once, I stepped into the library and found a folder lying open on the desk, and for a fleeting moment I considered looking inside, but something stopped me. It was not fear of being caught. It was fear that once I saw whatever was inside, I would never return to who I had been before. Graham returned at dawn, weary but never disheveled. He stepped into the kitchen where I sat beneath a single lamp, and he looked at me as though he already knew I had been waiting. "You do not need to do that," he murmured. "I cannot sleep if I do not know you are coming back," I replied, not as reproach but as truth. He said nothing, only poured himself a glass of water and sat across from me, and the silence between us felt like a strange blend of calm and tension. That was when I began to understand that to survive in Graham Callahan's world, I could not simply be a woman who cared for him. I needed to be someone who could observe, step back, wait, and move only when the moment was right. I no longer knew exactly what I was doing, only that each passing day pulled me deeper into him, not because of promises or tender gestures, but because the very existence of him made it impossible to return to the ordinary life I once knew. And among all the cameras watching my every step, the only thing I truly needed to watch was the man controlling them. I saw Lucas again on a Wednesday afternoon when Graham was away. He had left early without a word, leaving me alone in the silent, breathless estate, surrounded by staff who hovered at the precise distance required to avoid appearing curious. I borrowed Mrs. Wilkins's car under the excuse of stopping by Rosie's diner, and for the first time in days I stepped beyond the electric fences and surveillance into a place where I still felt like myself. I took my usual seat by the window and ordered coffee and a pastry. I had barely lifted the cup when he appeared, as if he knew exactly where and when I would be there. Lucas wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his eyes hidden behind dark glasses, though I recognized the cold sharpness beneath them. "May I sit?" he asked, without waiting for permission. I did not refuse, partly because I had no reason to, partly because I wanted to hear him, to understand why this man made Graham so wary. "Are you following me?" I asked bluntly. Lucas gave a faint, humorless smile. "You live in Graham's house, but you do not belong to that world. Sooner or later, you will need someone to tell you the truth. I am listening." He leaned closer and slid off his sunglasses. "Do you know you are living in the same mansion where Natalie once stayed? Same room, same camera placements, same kind of concern wrapped neatly in the word protection." My heart skipped once. I forced my hand not to tremble around the cup. Natalie left. That is what Graham said. Yes, but he did not tell you she left because she was afraid, because she discovered something she was not meant to see. Just as you are beginning to notice that something feels wrong. I stared directly into his eyes. "So you approached me for what? To push me against Graham?" Lucas leaned back, folding his arms. "I want nothing from you. I only want you to see clearly. You are becoming the next version of a game he has played very well, and I hate watching someone like you get pulled into it." "Someone like me?" I repeated, unsure whether it was an insult or something else. "Actually, I think you are smart," he said quietly. "But smart is not enough when the person across from you is Graham Callahan." His words left a heavy echo behind them. I wanted to argue, to insist I chose my own path, but somewhere deep inside, I knew Lucas had struck the nerve I had been trying to ignore. I no longer knew what, if anything, I was in control of. "I do not know where Natalie went," Lucas continued, "but I know one thing. She once believed Graham loved her. And you?" I asked. "Did you love her?" Lucas's expression darkened. "I once thought I could save her." I said nothing. His answer, simple and without theatrics, held more weight than anything he could have confessed. He was not trying to appear noble or broken. He spoke like someone who had lost a battle whose rules were written by someone else. "If you need to talk," he said, "call. I will listen." He left a card on the table, plain white. Nothing but a number. Then he walked away without looking back. I sat there holding the card, my heart suspended between two worlds and no certainty which one was real. When I returned to the estate later that afternoon, Graham was still gone. My room remained untouched, every surface too perfect, too controlled. But I no longer looked at the cameras the same way. Now I began asking myself, who was truly watching whom? And more unsettling still, I began questioning my own emotions. Because perhaps I was not only being drawn to Graham, perhaps I was slowly being pulled into something deeper, darker, and Lucas, somehow, had become a part of it too. Graham returned just as the last light faded, the sound of his car rolling across the courtyard striking me like a reminder that whatever quiet space I had carved out to think was ending. I had been standing inside my room looking down at the back garden when I saw him step out of the car, his charcoal suit still perfectly pressed, his face betraying no sign of fatigue. Yet the moment he lifted his head, something inside me stalled. He was looking straight up at the window where I stood, his gaze cutting through glass and distance as though neither existed. I stepped back quickly, pulled the curtain shut, and felt my heartbeat hammer against my ribs like someone caught doing something they should not. I had no idea whether Lucas had already drifted into his awareness, but guilt had settled into me the moment I returned. After a quiet dinner, Graham asked me to come to his office on the 3rd floor, a place I had never seen. The room was smaller than I expected, but organized with the precision of a fortress built for control. One wall was covered with monitors, streaming footage from cameras across the estate. The desk held thick files, and behind it rose a towering bookshelf with locked drawers. Graham settled into a black leather chair, handed me a glass of wine, and simply watched me, the air between us heavy, the way water feels before a storm breaks. "You saw Lucas again," he said, his voice even to the point of coldness. I did not ask how he knew. I simply nodded. "At Rosie's." "What did he say?" "A lot. About Natalie. About the room I am staying in. About you." Graham neither flinched nor rushed to defend himself. He rose, crossed to a filing cabinet, pulled out a thin folder, and set it in front of me. "Do you want to know why Natalie disappeared?" I looked at the folder, hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He opened it, laying each page on the table like evidence in a silent trial. Photographs of Natalie at a gala, bank transactions, passport copies, travel records, And finally, a picture of her standing beside Lucas at a small airport in Colombia. She was not abandoned by me, he said. She chose to leave, and she did not leave alone. I picked up the last photo, feeling a faint tremor in my fingers. Natalie stood close to Lucas, both wearing sunglasses, their faces turned toward a private jet behind them. There was no fear, no coercion. Lucas said he wanted to save her, I whispered. He wanted to escape me, Graham replied. And Natalie was the best way out. They planned it for months before I knew. I thought I loved her. But she never loved me. She loved money, loved power, and when Lucas promised her both without sacrifice, she did not hesitate. You looked for them? I know where they are, he said calmly. But I do not pursue them. They chose their life. What I will not accept is you being pulled into their old games. It felt as though someone had torn down a heavy curtain I had mistaken for truth. Everything I believed I was slowly unraveling suddenly rearranged itself. Lucas was not a victim. Natalie was not missing. And Graham, the man I had half believed to be controlling and manipulative, now sat across from me offering pieces of the truth without demanding I choose his side. Why did you not tell me earlier? I asked, my voice tight. Because you were still listening to them, and I did not want to interfere before you were ready to see for yourself. I lowered my head, the wine in my hand now cold. Guilt and confusion wrapped around me like a damp blanket. Graham stepped closer, standing before me, not touching, simply watching. I am not a perfect man, Charlotte, but I do not lie about what I feel for you. I lifted my eyes to his. Certainty had drained out of me long ago. Only a fragile, trembling trust stirred in its place, and I knew then that if I stayed, I would no longer be a mere observer. I would become a piece in a game where anyone could turn in a single night. I packed the next morning quietly and decisively, as if hesitation itself might drag me back into a loop with no exit. The room where I had slept and worried and watched him from afar now felt larger, colder, as though reclaiming its emptiness from before I arrived. I left no note, called no housekeeper, gave no warning. But as I pulled my suitcase down the hallway, Graham was already there, leaning against the library doorway, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on me as though he had anticipated every step. I stopped, gripping the handle of my suitcase, fighting the pull of everything inside me urging me to stay. I have to go, I said softly, my voice trembling but unbroken. Graham nodded slowly. I know. You are not going to ask why? I think I already do. He stepped closer, not enough to make me retreat, but close enough that I could see the effort it took for him to keep whatever he felt contained. You think I am playing a game of control, that what I feel for you is part of a surveillance system I built. And after everything, you are still not sure what is real. I do not know how to love someone without fearing I will be swallowed whole, I whispered, my eyes blurring. And you are too much, too strong, too powerful, too full of secrets. I do not know if I can stand beside you without disappearing. He said nothing. No excuses, no promises, no pleading. And that made something inside me fracture. Maybe I need to go back to a place where I can hear myself think, I continued. Somewhere without cameras, without people watching, without the feeling that I am a piece in someone else's design. He nodded again, as though he had rehearsed this truth long before I voiced it. The car will take you, he said quietly. No one will stop you, and no one will follow you after today. I bit my lip, swallowing tears, and nodded in gratitude. Then I walked. Each step felt like it was pulling a piece of me loose. When I stepped out of the estate, sunlight fell through the trees in thin, glimmering bands across the stone path. The black SUV waited, the driver bowing his head when I approached. I did not look back. I could not. I knew that if I saw Graham's eyes one more time, my resolve would shatter. The car moved through the gates, past the tall iron fence and the tree-lined road, carrying me back to a life I once called ordinary. But I was no longer the woman I had been 7 days earlier. I carried sleepless nights, and the memory of a man who showed me what it meant for love to be silent, and for letting go to require no blame. I returned to my old apartment, same small kitchen, same leaking faucet, same narrow walls, but I was no longer intact. That evening I turned on the kitchen light, made tea, and stared out the window. For the first time in days, there was no message, no name glowing on my screen, no knock on the door. The The silence felt both like freedom and a wound, because the one thing he did not do was the very thing that made me cry quietly into the dim light. He let me go. I did not know what I expected after leaving. Maybe a message, a sign that Graham still thought of me, that he had not let go entirely, or even a small, hesitant question to keep the silence from becoming absolute. But nothing came. 3 days passed, my phone buzzing only for ads and bank notifications. I returned to Rosie's, where the old owner greeted me with a quiet smile, asking nothing, as if she knew something larger hovered behind my silence. I tried to fall back into routine, brewing coffee, wiping tables, smiling at familiar customers, but each night I sat by the window with a cooling cup of tea, watching the streetlights fade and wondering whether he was thinking of me. On the 4th day, I found a cream envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no postmark, only my name written in familiar, careful handwriting. Inside was a handwritten letter and an invitation card. I opened it, my pulse quickening with each line. Charlotte, if you are reading this, it means I kept my word. I let you go. No calls, no messages, no pursuit. Not because I did not want to, but because I knew you needed the space to remember who you are. I never expected someone like you to walk into my life, and even less did I expect that when you walked out, everything would grow so unbearably quiet. But I respect it, respect your choice, and respect what you allowed me to feel in the short time we had. A week is not long, but it was enough for me to know some things cannot be hidden. Like the way I missed seeing your eyes at the end of the hallway each morning, or the way the whiskey tasted different at night when no one shared it with me. I am not writing this to convince you to return. I only want to invite you to an evening. No strong drinks, no cameras, no guards. Just music, lights, and if you choose, one last dance. I will be there. But I will not come to find you if you do not come. If you want to, I will wait. G. I set the letter on the table, my heart more tangled than ever. I lifted the invitation, an embossed card bearing the name of a small venue by the river, once an old theater restored into an art space. The event would be on Saturday at 8 o'clock. Nothing binding, nothing certain, but I knew that if I went, everything would shift. And if I did not, then perhaps the only thing that would remain unchanged was the silence I had been forcing myself to live with. That night I sat alone in my small kitchen, the letter beside a half-eaten piece of bread. The warm light stretched long across the floor, lonely and soft. And I wondered whether some chances come only once in a lifetime, chances that do not resemble certainty, but arrive as quiet invitations strong enough to stir everything you tried to bury. One final invitation. One more step toward the man I feared and missed in equal measure, and perhaps the only man who had ever let me walk away without closing the door behind me. I arrived at 5 minutes to 8, standing before the large wooden doors of the old theater with a restlessness I could feel in every breath. The building had been restored but still held its old soul. The red brick walls, the arched windows, the soft golden lights inside casting the kind of glow that made me feel as though I were about to step into someone else's memory. I wore a simple, long black dress, nothing extravagant, only enough to make me feel strong enough to walk into any room. I wasn't here to be convinced. I was here to set terms. A hostess led me down a marble hallway lined with paintings, the distant echo of a waltz drifting from the main hall as though it were pulsing through the very walls. Inside, the ballroom glimmered under hundreds of candles and crystal chandeliers, a scene, almost unreal in its beauty. But I wasn't searching for beauty. I was searching for him, and then I saw him. Graham stood at the far end of the room among men in tuxedos and women shimmering in silver and gold, yet apart from all of them, holding a glass in one hand, his eyes scanning the room with a quiet focus that seemed to cut deeper than sight. When his eyes found mine, the room seemed to still, as if someone had quietly drawn a breath and refused to release it. He didn't rush toward me. He didn't look away. He walked slowly, deliberately, each step measured like a bridge being rebuilt between two people who had once stood too close and now stood as strangers by choice. "Thank you for coming," he said, his low voice familiar in a way that tugged at something inside me. "I told you I'd wait." "I didn't come to be convinced," I answered. "I came to say what I needed." He nodded, the expression in his eyes no longer that of the powerful man from those shadowed nights, but of someone bracing for words that could cost him everything. "I can't walk back into your world the way it was. I said slowly. I can't live in a house full of cameras, can't love a man whose thoughts I have to second-guess, wondering what he is planning, and whether tomorrow I will still fit into the life he has drawn. He absorbed every word without argument. I need clarity, I continued. If you want me to stay, I won't be part of your security system. I don't need guards, or surveillance, or protection disguised as control. I need a partner, not a director. Graham lowered his glass, his fingers tightening slightly. You're right, he said quietly. I built everything to protect myself, so much that I forgot the truth sometimes needs to be seen to hold on to what matters. I don't love your power, I said softly. I love the man behind it. The one who could sit silently beside me through an entire night so I wouldn't feel alone. The man who let me walk away without pulling me back. A faint smile touched his lips, the first I'd seen in days. I can let you closer, he said. No cameras, no barriers. As long as you don't walk away when you see the parts of me that are not beautiful. I've already seen them, I whispered. And I'm still here. He held out his hand, not demanding, not coaxing, simply offering. I placed my hand in his, the warmth of his skin traveling up my arm, settling somewhere deep in my chest. But this time, I said, holding his gaze, we build something new. From the beginning. No repetition. I don't want repetition, he answered. I want something real. We said nothing more. The music swirled around us, couples moving in slow circles across the polished floor, but I saw only him. And when he led me toward the center of the room, every watching eye softened into the background. It wasn't the first time we'd danced, but it was the first time I stepped forward by choice, under my own terms, and he chose not to refuse. We left the party just after 11, the city already settling into sleep under its muted glow and empty streets. Graham didn't say where he was taking me, simply held my hand and guided me toward the car, and I didn't ask. Strangely, I felt safe. The car drifted through tree-lined streets, away from the center of the city, toward the place I had once run from. But this time there was no heaviness, no sense of being pulled into something I couldn't escape. Only two people, a hand in a hand, and a road that no longer felt foreign. When the car stopped before the white estate tucked into its quiet grounds, I noticed all the lights were dark except for a soft glow from a room on the second floor. Graham opened the door for me as he had the very first time, but the look in his eyes was different, no guardedness, no waiting, only something startlingly honest, like he himself couldn't hide how much this moment meant to him. We walked inside, my heels dangling from my fingers tapping lightly against the wooden floor, the sound strangely comforting. There was no Mrs. Wilkins, no staff, only silence, punctuated by our steps and our breathing. He led me upstairs, but instead of the room I once stayed in, he stopped before another door. A larger room with high ceilings, a wide window overlooking the back garden, a bookshelf, a worn leather reading chair, and a fire crackling warmly in the hearth. This is where I actually live, he said, voice low. No cameras. No one comes in except me. And now, you. I stepped inside, feeling a warmth different from the rest of the estate, the scent of old wood, the faint musk of books, and a whisper of whiskey in the air, blending into something unexpectedly tender. I sat on the velvet chair beside the fire, my hand still in his. I want to hear everything, I said. No holding back, no hiding. Graham sat, opposite me, the firelight dancing in his eyes. He was silent for a long moment, as if arranging the pieces of a life he'd never fully spoken aloud. Then he began. He told me about his father, a man who ruled with fists and fear, about a childhood carved from commands, silence, and loyalty, about being raised as an heir to something built on power rather than affection. I believed control was the only way to keep everything from falling apart, he said quietly. Until I met you. I listened without interrupting. He spoke of Natalie, of Lucas, of transactions and losses, people who vanished without anyone asking why. He didn't soften anything. He didn't forgive himself in the telling. He only spoke, as though he needed to hear the truth out loud as much as I did. A part of me, he said, looking at me, always thought you would leave, that no one stays long after seeing what I try to keep hidden. But I came back, I answered, and I want to be here, as long as you let me in for real. He rose, walked to me, and knelt down, holding my gaze. I've lost so much by gripping too tightly. I'm willing to let go of everything now, if that's what it takes to hold on to you the right way. I leaned in and pressed my lips to his forehead, a touch lighter than breath but deeper than any words. We didn't leave that room the rest of the night. No phones, no alarms, no lenses watching from corners. Only the wind brushing against the window, the fire snapping softly, and two people shedding the last armor they had left. In that tender darkness, he told me his mother's real name, the place he always longed to visit but never dared, and that his greatest fear wasn't losing power but waking one morning with nothing left worth keeping. I listened with my hand resting over his heart, feeling its steady rhythm slow as I leaned into him. It was the first night I stayed not out of promise or obligation or curiosity, but because I had seen the truth. And I still chose to stay. I woke to the sound of birds outside the window and the pale morning light filtering through thin curtains, the room still warm with the fading scent of the fire, and Graham sitting beside me with a cup of coffee, watching me as though he couldn't quite believe I was still there. For a few minutes we said nothing, the silence no longer taut but resting gently over everything we had acknowledged. Then he set the cup down and pulled a thick envelope from the bedside drawer. Plain, worn at the edges, no name on it. He handed it to me without explanation. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, and an old fax with a faded header still reading Perth, Western Australia. I read slowly, my heart sinking a little more with each page. Natalie was still alive, not hiding, but living a different life under a different name. Her hair shorter, her gaze just as bold as the first photo he had shown me. But what startled me wasn't her survival. It was the letter she had sent 3 months earlier, not to Graham, but to a man named Simon in London, referring to Graham as a failed experiment. I lifted my eyes, unable to speak. He didn't urge me to. He let me read everything. And when I folded the final page, something shifted inside me. Not jealousy, not hurt, but release. "You've been keeping track of her," I said softly. "Not to control her," he answered, "but to be sure she wouldn't come back and destroy what I am trying to rebuild. With you. She was once me, wasn't she?" I asked. "No," he said quickly, sharply. "She was someone I thought was meant for me. But you were never her, and you never will be. But everything I did, everywhere I stayed, everyone I met, wasn't it all just a shadow of the life she once lived?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "It began that way, yes. But you broke every pattern. You didn't hide. You didn't manipulate. You didn't pull me into a haze of desire and disappear into smoke. You stayed. You left, and then you came back not for power, not because I convinced you, but because you chose it." I tightened my grip on the documents, feeling my heart settle. The truth was that Graham had built his life with clean, cold lines, and Natalie had once been the fracture in the blueprint. But I wasn't Natalie. I hadn't come to break anything. I had come to look at everything directly and say that if he wanted me to stay, he had to live without the mask he once believed he couldn't remove. "You kept this letter because you thought I needed to see it," I said. "I kept it because I knew the day would come when you'd ask," he replied. "And I don't want to hide anything. Not from you." I stepped forward, placed the folder back into the drawer, and closed it gently. "I don't want to live under anyone's shadow, Graham. Not Natalie's, not anyone's before me. If I stay, it will be as Charlotte, no one else." He nodded and pulled me into his arms. In that embrace, I knew every comparison had ended. No more Natalie, no more ghosts, only me, and a future still unshaped, but for the first time free of shadows and built entirely on truth. The next morning, I sat alone in the garden behind the estate, where white roses were blooming under the first light of day, that quiet corner being the only place in the entire house where I felt I could think without being watched. Everything between Graham and me was shifting. No longer a tug of war between control and freedom, suspicion and trust, but a quiet conversation about choice. I knew love never came without a price, and loving a man like Graham Callahan meant accepting a life lived between blurred shades of light and shadow, where an embrace might conceal anger, where tenderness could exist beside a secret not yet ready to surface. I had seen what he tried to hide, had read Natalie's letter, had felt the old fear embedded in the walls of this house. Yet I had also seen a man who no longer wished to hide behind power, a man learning how to let go without destroying what remained. And now he was waiting for me, not with words but with distance, not following me into the garden, not sending anyone to ask what I was thinking, simply letting me be his way of saying that no matter what I chose, he would not stand in the way. When I walked back inside, he was sitting in the library with a book open in his hands, the light washing over the page. He looked up as I approached, closed the book, and waited. "I will not live here as a part of you," I said. "I will not be the woman walking behind a man whose name is too heavy for anyone to breathe normally." He nodded without surprise. "What do you want?" "A real life," I answered. "A small apartment in the city, a job of my own, mornings without a bodyguard by the door, and evenings where, if you want to see me, you knock." He smiled then, something soft warming his eyes. "You won't let me protect you anymore?" "I will protect myself, and I will choose to love you every day, not because I need you, but because I want to." He stood, walked toward me in that unhurried way he always did, as though each step were its own confession. "Do you understand the cost of that choice?" he asked. "I do," I said without hesitation. "It means losing the illusion of safety, facing danger on my own terms, stepping out of your arms to keep myself whole. But the cost of not choosing would be far greater." "Why?" "Because then I would lose myself. And you." He pulled me close, holding me tightly as though it was the first time he truly understood that love is not the act of holding on, but the courage to let go so someone can return on their own feet. That day, I left the estate for the second time, not in silence, but with a slow kiss at the door, a promise without chains, and a look long enough to tell us both that I would return, not to live in his world but to build one where we could both belong. Graham didn't stop me, didn't ask when I would come back, only said that if I ever needed anything, he would always answer. But this time, I knew that when I called, it wouldn't be because I needed saving, it would be because I wanted him beside me when I needed no one else but him. Love is not a destination but a choice repeated each day, paid for with everything we once believed was unshakable, and for the first time, I was ready to pay it. I returned to Rosie's diner, not to hide from anyone or to seek quiet in my own mind, but simply because I wanted to stand behind the counter, make a cup of coffee with my own hands, hear the bell ring as customers walked in, and be called by name as if I were a part of this place. I rented a small apartment above the diner, with a window overlooking a quiet street and flower boxes. I tended each morning not luxurious, no estate, no electric fences, but mine, and Graham understood that. He no longer appeared unannounced, no longer sent cars, no longer placed people around me to observe what I ate for dinner. Instead, he sent morning messages asking what I wanted for dinner, and if I said, "I'll cook," he would arrive on time with a bottle of wine, sitting quietly as he watched me prepare the meal, as though it were something he had never imagined he would learn to treasure. We learned how to love each other again, without barriers or empty promises, only small, steady gestures like morning coffee, good-night texts, brief calls between meetings, and afternoons spent side by side without speaking. One evening, as I was folding napkins in the diner kitchen after closing, Graham walked in without announcing himself, but this time I didn't startle. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no tie, no jacket, only that familiar look in his eyes, tired but shining with something I had come to know well. He placed a small wooden box on the counter. "What's this?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. "Open it." I did. Inside was a small vintage music player, the kind that ran on batteries with a little brass dial. I switched it on, and the slow waltz began to play the same old melody from the night he first led me onto the dance floor. He stepped closer, held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" "In the kitchen?" I laughed. "Anywhere you want," he said. I slipped off my apron, set it aside, and placed my hand in his. We danced between wooden tables under the dim yellow lights, the hum of the old air conditioner mixing with the music, and my heart beating in time with the steps of the man I had chosen, the man who was learning, day by day, to choose me too. The first time he led me onto a dance floor, I had been swept along. The second time, I had taken the first step. But this time, in the small kitchen, where no one was watching, where no one expected anything, where no one whispered warnings, we danced for no one but ourselves, not to impress, not to convince, but to remember that love, at its core, is simple, a dance, a melody, and two people willing to follow each other even without knowing the next beat. When the music faded, He held my hand tightly, resting his forehead against mine, whispering so softly I almost didn't hear it. "Thank you for coming back. This time it's for me," I said. "Not for you, not for anyone else. I came back because I want to be here. With you, but on my own terms." He nodded, his lips brushing my forehead. No more words were needed. We stayed like that for a long time, among the lingering scent of coffee and the quiet cracking of old hesitations finally breaking apart, and I knew things would not always be easy. But I also knew I had chosen well, because I had learned how to walk without losing myself, and that path had led me back steadier, softer to a dance that was finally mine. I once believed love was like a storm, arriving, without warning, sweeping everything away, leaving quiet ruin in its wake. But after all that Graham and I had endured, I realized love was not the storm but the person who comes after, offering a hand and saying, "We will rebuild together, brick by brick, without hurry, without grand gestures, but with honesty and courage." I chose Graham not because he was perfect, but because he dared to let me see the imperfect parts of him. I chose him not because he protected me, but because he let me protect myself. And I chose him with my eyes wide open, not dreamy or naive, but with a heart once wounded yet still soft enough to believe again. This love is a daily choice, not only when things are easy but also when silence stretches long and words are hard to find, simple dinners with expectant glances, nights sitting together without explanations, hands held not out of fear of losing but out of gratitude for still having each other. My story is no fairy tale. It is full of doubt, hard decisions, and moments when I wanted to let go. Yet in those moments, I learned to listen to myself, confront fear, and step out of what no longer felt like me. We often think we need someone strong to lean on, but sometimes what we truly need is someone patient enough to wait for us to become ourselves. Graham did not save me. He let me save myself. And when I was ready, he was still there. The most beautiful love is not when two people have no past, but when they can face each other's past and still choose to move forward together. I hope that through this story, you can feel that too, that love is more than emotion. It is choice, forgiveness, courage, and the belief that you deserve to be loved well. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. If it touched a corner of your heart, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Have you ever loved in a way that changed you? Do you dare to love again with your eyes wide open? We would be honored to read your honest reflections, because they show us these stories matter. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos where we will continue to bring you heartfelt stories full of depth and humanity every day. Please like and share this video if you believe it deserves it, and help spread a little more kindness to those around you. I wish you good health, a peaceful life, and a gentle heart through all the ups and downs of life. Thank you for staying until the end. Goodbye, and we'll see you in our next video.